In this video, we will get ourselves acquainted with the Tableau desktop workspace. We will look at the options that are available for us when we're creating a worksheet, a dashboard, and a story. And I will highlight sections and functionalities that may be easily missed but could really be helpful whenever we're creating our charts and dashboards. This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is a learning platform as well as an online learning community that we can tap into as we expand our skills in this data-driven world. Working with data and creating dashboards require a healthy dose of creativity and resourcefulness. We need to be thoughtful about our presentation and our data stories. Acquiring more skills in areas like graphic design, illustration, UX/UI design, creative writing, and more can definitely complement our Tableau skills. Fortunately, Skillshare has many classes on these topics, and most classes run under 60 minutes. Talk about productivity. Investing this time, taking the courses in the span of a couple of lunch breaks or a few coffee breaks can mean massive ROI or return on investment. The next classes on my list are the Figma-related classes. More and more we see Figma integrated with Tableau, and with my Skillshare membership, there are no limits to the number of classes I can take. All I need is my curiosity in tow. If you are interested, the first 1,000 people to use the link in the description below will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. And if you decide to take some courses, please do share the courses that you enjoyed the most in the comments down below. I'd love to check out the courses you found most helpful. When we first open up Tableau Desktop, this is the interface that we're going to see. On the left-hand side, you can see ways we can connect to a data source. Right here in the middle is a list of all the workbooks that you may be recently working with. Right underneath it are sample dashboards that come with your Tableau installation. And on the right-hand side are links to additional resources and training if you need them. It's worth noting here that we can connect to a file-based data source or a server-based data source. The types of file that we can connect to in Tableau include Microsoft Excel, a text file, a JSON file, Microsoft Access, a PDF file, spatial files, statistical files, or some additional options. When we click on More, we can see the file extensions that are supported. So if we needed to, we can technically connect to another workbook or a packaged workbook, as well as local cube files. We can also connect to a server-based data source, and Tableau supports a number of server-based data sources. When we click on More, we can see this list. As of the time of this video, there are at least 76 connectors that are readily available in Tableau. So for example, if you are connecting to relational databases, you should be able to see some of them in here. For example, we have Microsoft SQL Server, we have MySQL, Oracle, PostgreSQL. You can also just easily search for them. For example, if I'm looking for Snowflake, I can start typing it in and it will show me the connector. If you don't see your vendor or your product in this list, chances are you can still connect to those data sources as long as you have a driver using JDBC or ODBC. One other possibility is a web data connector. So this allows us to connect to a dataset that is accessible using HTTP or through the web. When we select this, it's simply going to ask us where our web data connector is. If we don't have a readily usable web data connector, we can also build our own. And Tableau provides all the documentation and resources that you need to get started. It is also worthwhile noting that another way to connect to a file-based data source is simply by having it open. In this case, I'm using a PC, so I have Windows Explorer. Is we can simply drag and drop the file onto an open instance of Tableau. So in this case, I'm going to take Sample Superstore, drag it over to an open instance of Tableau, and it's going to connect to it. Once we connect to our data source, we will see the data source page. The default data source name is assigned, although we can make adjustments to this. When you hover over this is simply a text box and we can make some adjustments. So for example, if we simply want to call this Superstore, we can also add additional data sources from here by clicking on this cylinder icon. In this data source page, we can choose exactly which set of records we want to use, and we can also make further adjustments. On the left-hand side, we can see our data. At the top is where our connections are listed, and we can add more by using this add icon if we need to have more connections for this particular data source. Right underneath it are the collections of records that are available. Note that I am connected right now to an Excel file, therefore I am seeing sheets. If we open the original Excel file, we can see that there is a one-to-one mapping to the tabs that you're seeing from the Excel file to the tabs that are being shown on screen. So we have orders, people, returns. We also have orders, people, returns. Now in this case, it looks like it's duplicated, but the reason for that is because Tableau also draws out and considers as tables what we call named ranges in Excel. If we have connected to a different data source type, then the terminology that we're going to see on this left-hand pane will change, and it will be adjusted accordingly. This is an example of what you can see if you connected to CSV files. Tableau will consider all the files within that folder as your tables, and notice that the terminology has changed too. This is now called files. And this is an example of what you will see if you connected to a database like SQL Server. Notice that the terminology has changed again. It has tables, which is the tables that we're going to find in the database. We also have stored procedures, which is what you can find under the programmability section of SQL Server. We are now back to our original Excel connection. Once we drag a table to work with, for example, orders, drag it over, we will see a few changes in our canvas. On the top right, we can see options for connection. We have two types. We have live and extract. There is also another option for filtering our data. When we add a filter to this level, we also often refer to this as data source filtering. One place where this terminology is used is when we talk about Tableau's order of operations, and when you scroll down, you're going to see the reference to data source filters. What we are seeing right now here is what Tableau considers as a logical layer. Another way to work with the tables is through the physical layer, and in here we can simply double-click on the logical layer, and it will bring us to a physical layer. This is a pretty big topic, so I'm going to provide some links in the description down below for further videos or further resources if you want to learn more about the physical and the logical layers. Let's close the physical layer now. Right underneath the logical layer, we are going to see some additional information about that particular table. In particular, we are going to see the metadata where we find all the fields that are related to this table. We can also see a preview of the first few records. Some things that are worth noting here. We already see a summary of the number of fields and number of rows. For file-based data sources, Tableau would have provided some default data types based on values from the first few thousand records it has scanned from the file. And we can see those default data types right here, both in the metadata window and at the preview window. We can adjust these if we need to. So for example, if this is not meant to be a number, we can click on this icon and then change the data type. We can also do this from the metadata window. So in here, I can also click on that and then make adjustments to the data type. For each of the fields in the preview window, there is also a drop-down arrow on the top right corner of the card, and this provides us additional ways to adjust this data. So clicking on that, we can see that we can rename, we can copy values, hide some of the columns, change our aliases, or create calculated fields, groups, or bins. We can also click on Describe. So this just allows us to get additional information and context about this particular field. This exact same option is available also at the metadata view. So in here, clicking on the field, these are the exact same options. If we need to check the underlying records, we don't have to go back to the original file. We can simply go to the left pane again, find the tab or table that we want to preview, and there's a little icon in here that allows us to view the underlying records. So when we click on this gives us our underlying records. Going back to the preview window, we can also click on this little gear icon if we want to display the preview differently. The options that are available for us include showing aliases, showing hidden fields, as well as changing the sort order of the columns that are in the preview window. If we need more space, we can collapse the metadata view. We can also even collapse the records preview. Let's bring this back up. Let us now go create a new worksheet and get to know the interface and workspace when we are working with sheets or views in Tableau. We can do that by clicking on this Sheet 1. The workspace changes once you are working on sheets or charts in Tableau. The prominent areas here include the workbook name, the menu options at the very top, the toolbar that includes a lot of shortcuts. Right in this toolbar, you're also going to see Show Me. We also have shelves, which can contain data fields, We have a column shelf, a row shelf, a pages shelf, and a filter shelf. So the shelves are all right here. We are also seeing a marks card. At the center in here is what we call a view. Sometimes we also call it a viz. Or this also corresponds to what we call a sheet or a worksheet. On the side, you see a sidebar that contains a lot of our fields, and there are 2 tabs in the sidebar. You have a data tab as well as an analytics tab. At the bottom, we're going to see our sheets tab. And although this is called a sheets tab, it does contain a link back to your data source as well as sheets and dashboards or stories if you have them. And right underneath it is what we call our status bar. If we have a lot of worksheets, we can navigate through those worksheets using these arrows, and we can also change the way we look at our views using these little icons at the very bottom. Now that we have an overview of the many different areas, let's take a look at each one of these areas more closely. On the menu, we're going to find File, which allows us to open workbooks, save our workbooks, even export our versions of our workbook. It also allows us an option to print to PDF or even change our repository location. Under Data, these are options related to your data source, so you can technically add a data source from this menu item if you so wish to. Under Worksheet, these are worksheet-specific actions, including showing additional components like caption, summary, showing some of the additional cards, and even showing the toolbar or removing the toolbar altogether. Dashboard is very specific to dashboard-related objects and components, as well as stories. We will be covering those in different videos. The analysis menu item is important because there are some options in here that are not readily available in any of the other areas. From this item, we can choose to aggregate our measures or disaggregate our measures. We can also choose to stack our marks or unstack our marks. And from here, we can also see options for showing special values as well as taking a look at our table layout. For example, when we go to our table layout, under here, under Advanced, from here, you can choose to leave the default of showing the innermost level at the bottom of the view, or even moving this up to the top of your view. We can also change the default orientation of our labels at the bottom of our view. Under the map menu are options related to the maps, and from here we can change our background map, also have access to adding background images, as well as adding our own custom geocoding. When you do have a map, you're going to see the map legend, map layers, and map options enabled. Under the Format menu, these are options for formatting the worksheet and the workbook, and this includes options to adjust font, alignment, shading, borders, and lines, turning on or turning off animation, as well as adjusting cell size, workbook themes, and options of copying and pasting formatting from worksheet to worksheet. The Server menu allows us to sign into a Tableau server, and from there we can open a workbook that exists on the server or even publish our current workbook to a Tableau server. The toolbar allows us to get to the most common tasks, and from this toolbar, you can always go back to the initial Tableau screen by clicking on the Tableau icon. Undo is going to be your best friend. Feel free to explore in Tableau. If you make any mistakes or you don't like what you're seeing, you can always undo. And there is also a corresponding arrow for redo. We can save our work, add additional data sources, we can refresh our data sources as well, quickly create a new worksheet, or duplicate a worksheet, or clear a worksheet. There are also options for swapping whatever is in your rows or columns, or quickly sorting some of your fields. Fit is also important. So for example, if we have a bar chart, let's pull category in and let's say sales. Changing the fit allows us to adjust the usage of the area. So in here, standard means Tableau will introduce a scroll bar if there's more than what can be fit on a screen. We can also choose to fit the width, fit the height, or fit entire view. Going back to standard view, if we add additional details here, for example, if we take state, now it gives us a scroll bar, and from here we can also still decide to fit the height if we wanted to. Another icon in here that you might find useful is the presentation mode. When we select presentation mode, it allows us to see what our end users will see. It will take away any of the cards, any of the design elements, and what we are left with is what this view would look like after we publish this worksheet. One more important icon in here is this Show or Hide Cards menu. If you want to hide or show some of your columns or row shelves or your marks cards, you can check or uncheck them from here. Where you might find this useful is if, for example, you accidentally move around some of your shelves or some of your cards. So for example, in here, we're going to take filters, put that somewhere else. Maybe your columns goes all the way to the bottom. We have your rows, again, maybe just moving things around and resizing things around and us getting lost with the new layout of our workspace. In this case, we can simply reset the layout. So from here, we can click on Reset Cards. Let's try this. There you go. On the top right corner, you're going to see Show Me. So you can simply click on this button to expand it, click on it again to collapse it. Show Me is just like an idea starter or a chart starter or a chart wizard that gives you some options based on the fields that you have selected or available in your canvas. We can see some of the chart options disabled because the canvas currently doesn't have the fields that it needs, but some of them are also enabled. Let's collapse this again. Let's adjust this chart first. Maybe let's take away state. What's worth noting at this point is we are displaying bars, and these bars are what we call marks in Tableau. Right now, this is set to automatic, which means we haven't explicitly asked Tableau to create a bar chart. And what this also means is Tableau might change the bar to something else should we put another field in our canvas. For example, in here, if we take another continuous variable, let's say put that on rows, because currently this is set to automatic, Tableau can make the change from a bar to a shape or a circle. Therefore, in this case, potentially giving us a scatter plot. So let's just undo this. Any of the properties of the current mark or the current bar, we can adjust them using the marks card. So in here, we can see that there are attributes for color, size, label, detail, and tooltip. And these are the ones that are related to this bar that is being shown in your view right now. We should also notice in the status bar, this shows us the number of marks that are currently drawn on screen. There are 17 marks. Therefore, what we're saying is there are 17 bars. It's also telling us there are 17 by 1 columns, and it also reports to us an aggregated amount. So in this case, it's the sum of sales. If, for example, we decide to add segment to color, then we should note that the number of marks, if you take a look at it again, number of marks right now is no longer 17, it is 51, because there are actually 51 different bars. Even though we have still one long bar, we have subdivided one long bar into 3 different bars based on the segments that are related to that particular subcategory. Many of the cards in Tableau, they will have additional options related to them, and you can access this by clicking on the drop-down arrow on the top right corner of the box. For example, in this colored legend, as I hover over this, there's going to be a drop-down arrow, which allows us to edit the colors, format the legends, add a title, sort, or even hide the card. If we have a filter, for example, so if I click on subcategory right now, show filter, it is going to give me a filters card. And again, as you hover over this card, on the top right corner, there is a drop down, and these are additional options very specific to filters. Let us now take a look at the sidebar. So in your sidebar, when you are at a worksheet view, this is where you're going to find all of the fields related to the tables that you're connected to. For example, right now, I have a connection to Superstore, and all the fields that are showing up in here are the fields related to the Superstore data source. If, for example, I have 2 different data sources, in this case, I have an example for Superstore and World Indicators Extract, what you're going to notice is as I select a data source, the fields that are showing are the ones that are related to the data source that's currently selected. To make it easier to work with and to make it very obvious which table and which data source you're connected to, you can choose to minimize this window so that only one is showing up at the same time. Minimizing the window will force it to become a drop-down list. And in this case, again, it's going to be much easier to figure out which data source we are working with. Going back to our original workbook, you can notice in here that in your sidebar, you have 2 tabs. The data tab, again, will contain your data sources. It will also contain all the fields related to that data source. From this window, we can search for fields. For example, if I'm looking for anything that has category, I can simply start typing it in. I can also choose to filter. And in here, we have options for filtering based on calculation, dimension, measure, and comments. If we wanted to take a look at the underlying records, we can do it from this window as well. So this little grid icon that is view data, it will be the same functionality we've seen from the data source page. And the little arrow right beside the view data icon gives us additional options such as creating a calculated field, creating parameters, being able to group our fields based on the data source tables or based on folders. The sort option is also here, as well as hiding unused fields or expanding and collapsing any of the folders or hierarchies. Using folders is one way of organizing our fields, and if we do decide to go that route, you're going to have to go to this drop down, group by folder. You can start creating folders by right-clicking on an empty area, and from here you can create a folder, or you can also right-click on a field, so for example category, and under folders we can create a folder where we're going to place this field. So for example in here we're going to call this product related, and it will create that folder for us. The same icons that we have seen in the data source view, they also exist right here. And there will be a lot of visual cues throughout the canvas. The second tab in our sidebar on a worksheet view, we get the Analytics tab, and from here we can add a lot of reference lines. For example, we can add our constant line, average lines, maybe median with quartiles. There is also an option to add totals from here. Depending on the chart that you have, you can add a trend line, a forecast, and a cluster. And if we have fields that we want to use for a reference line, reference band, or distribution band, we can add it from this section. Some of these options occur in many different places. For example, in our toolbar, there is a way for us to add a new worksheet, a new dashboard, or a new story. And those same options exist at the very bottom. There is also a shortcut to create a new worksheet, a new dashboard, and a new story. Another example is using totals. In your Analytics tab, you're going to see totals right here. But yet another way to get to this is using Analysis and Totals. Let's just create a few more charts. So for example, in here, create a brand new worksheet. Perhaps we're looking at a line chart. Maybe let's also create a scatter plot. If you take a look at the options at the very bottom, right now we are showing the actual worksheet view. If we want to change this, if we click on the middle icon, it will allow us to have a thumbnail or a preview of our worksheet instead of just the name. And the very first option, it basically just gives us a grid view of the thumbnails of our worksheets. In any of these views, we can choose to rename, reorder, duplicate, or delete any of the sheets. When you have many different worksheets, it's also very helpful to rename your worksheets. And there are cases where you would want to change the color of your worksheet. So for example, perhaps anything that is blue is related to the first dashboard. So you can just decide to do this. And you can see these colors, not just from this view. We can go back to our original view. You should be able to see the first two worksheets with a blue color or a blue band. A couple final notes, we can collapse the sidebar at any point in time by clicking on this icon right beside the Analytics tab. When we collapse it, you can still see the tabs right on the side. If we want to expand it again, we simply just need to click on that icon again. Yet another alternative, if this is already collapsed, you can also expand this by going to Window, Show Sidebar. The sidebar also gets replaced temporarily depending on what we're trying to do with our charts. For example, when we try to format, going to the Format menu at the very top, let's say formatting the font, we will notice that the sidebar has been replaced with a Format Font sidebar. We can get back to the original sidebar simply by clicking on the X on the top right corner of the new Format sidebar. Another instance where the sidebar gets replaced is when we are formatting our maps. Let's create a simple map, so a brand new worksheet. I'm simply going to double click on State. When we go to Map, and in here Map Layers, you're going to notice that the sidebar now is very specific to map properties. For example, background for the map, map layers, and data layers that accompany the map. When you're familiar with the View interface or the View workspace, the workspace for the dashboard and the story will become more familiar. For example, when we add a brand new dashboard, clicking on this shortcut at the very bottom, we can see some similar options. We still get our menu and our toolbar. We still have a sidebar, although the options in here are a little bit different. So in here, the components that you are seeing are very specific to creating dashboards, including sizing the dashboard, the worksheets, and additional objects that we may want to include. This sidebar also has two tabs. It's also collapsible. The second tab is the Layout tab, and the items that might be easily missed from this tab are the position tabs, the X and Y coordinates, as well as the width and the height of any specific components or container. If we scroll down, This is also where we can set borders, backgrounds, and also inner and outer paddings. The moment we add sheets and other components, we are going to see all of those in this item hierarchy window. When we create a new story, we can expect a similar user experience. So clicking on the new story shortcut, we're seeing the same things. We still have our menu, our toolbar, we still have our sidebar, the components that are very specific to stories, including the story point, text, titles, and sizing. We have the story canvas. And on our sidebar, we still have the two tabs. We have the story tab and the layout tab. And for the layout tab, again, this is something that is very specific to stories. It allows us to change the navigation style, and we can choose between caption boxes, numbers, dots, or arrows. So for example, numbers, dots, or arrows. And this is it for the overview of the Tableau desktop interface. We looked at the workspace from many different areas and many different perspectives. We spent a bit of time on the data source page and the worksheet or view workspace. While we spent less time on the dashboard and story workspaces, we can see that there are a lot of similar components, and these similar components create a familiar look and feel that can make working with the dashboards and stories easier. I hope you found this video useful. Thank you so much for your time, and I will see you again next time.